When I was a kid, there was one movie I watched constantly on endless repeats, and that was Atlantis: The Lost Empire. I don't know exactly what drew me into this ugly duckling of a Disney movie, cause looking back now, it has tons of problems. Infrequent pacing, a one-dimensional antagonist, and what must have been a tug of war between a mature and heart-pounding adventure and a Disney movie aimed for a general audience. Much to say, it didn't work out that well for the company, as this and Treasure Planet were some of the last 2D animated films made by Disney before switching to 3D animation to this day. But back to my personal interactions with the movie, cause the one thing that got me hooked and addicted to watch this 10 times in a row, that's right, 10 times people, I'm not making this shit up, was mainly the unknown beauty of the sea. And I also had a crush on the main girl, Kida, for let's just say personal tastes. Oh, damn, she's too good. Now, me just saying that is a pretty old statement, and there actually is some truth to that. Masculine and heroic tales of man's ambition to tame the unknowns of the sea was a common theme in many of these stories. Finding inspiration from the Odyssey, some of these literary works have now become some of the greatest reads in history. Moby Dick, Treasure Island, and of course, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, the one that inspired Atlantis. The major appeal back in the 1800s was due to the fact that sea travel was becoming more mainstream for the public, and with it, an emerging interest in the properties of the deep blue. And according to scientific research to this day, we have yet to explore half of its content. It romanticized the sailor lifestyle, insert gay undertone here, and for a time was a major hit in bookstores right until the start of the World Wars, and around the time when people finally got the message that, oh yeah, the sea is actually fucking terrifying to die in. But what's most important about these stories is a sense of world building, where our merry crew must battle the monsters and storms of the dangerous oceans, while also finding out more about themselves and the world they've embarked on. That's basically half the appeal as to why I really enjoy these kinds of stories, and also might be a key factor in why I've been a fan of One Piece all this time. But I'm not gonna dive into another One Piece video because I think I've kissed his feet enough for one day. Instead, I want to focus on a more engrossing sea adventure, something that eerily mirrors Atlantis: The Lost Empire, and whose history shaped the foundation for one of the biggest anime to ever come out. Released in 1990, Nadia's Secret of Blue Water was produced by Studio Gainax, responsible for coining the term Gainax ending, histories of bankruptcy saves, and something I'll reference later in the video. The history of Nadia is very entrancing, and I mean that on good and bad terms. Conceived by the famous Hayao Miyazaki, whom then left and took elements from that project into his own works, the result of its production was what would happen when you realize your delicious steak that you chose over the rest costed more than your mortgage. The project was over budget, several shortcuts were made in the middle of the show, which I will have to unfortunately address, and the result was a loss of 80 million yen, as well as any rights to the show thereafter. So yeah, that expensive steak, not worth the price in the end. The show still garnered good reception though, and was one of the best anime shows of the early 90s, but just not as big to last a lifetime. It wasn't completely forgotten, but the enormous library of other well-notable shows from that era quickly outpaced it, and Nadia was left sunk, only rising again to prominence with digital streaming. And after watching it and learning of its history, I found it to be a truly fascinating show to watch. Not an all-time great, but an enjoyable adventure story that took chances, bookmarked its legacy in anime history, and was the building block for Gainax's and Hideaki Anno's magnum opus. In today's video, we will look at what made Nadia sail, what made it sink, and what it bore fruit to, in something I like to call Nadia, a maiden voyage and tragedy of the 1990s. The story of Nadia: Secret of Blue Water stars a young boy genius in glasses who meets a dark-skinned girl with a magic crystal and who travels in a state-of-the-art submarine to the lost city of Atlantis. Wait a minute, give me a second. Sorry guys, I was reading the synopsis for Atlantis: The Lost Empire. Not to say there isn't an Atlantis Nadia, there totally is, but if you're expecting hot supermodel Atlanteans, then you need an eye examination. Wait a second. The boy is named Jean, and the girl with the crystal is Nadia. Chased by the Grambus gang made up of jewel thieves Hansen, Sansen, and Grannis Granva, they come aboard the famous Nautilus, along with a little girl named Marie and a pet lion named King. It's helmed by the literary figure Captain Nemo, a hardened captain with weapons of war whose sole purpose is to annihilate a terrorist organization called Neo Atlantis before they conquer Earth. The cast goes on many seafarer adventures as we discover more hints and clues to reveal the secrets behind the crystal Nadia wears, the blue water. Be aware that a story of this scale was not so typical in other anime. I mean, evil organizations and superpower machines of war were prevalent in 80s and 90s shows of the past, but here, it takes characters and tales directly from 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea and builds an original story that tackles mature subject matter like love, depression, and what makes us human. What do we have to give up in order to survive, and should we give it up in the first place? These are questions the show really does well to talk about, while being for the most part a show that targets an adolescent crowd. The main characters are young and inexperienced in the world that adults live in, and try their best to fit in, even if the people they sail with do or say things out of their realm of comprehension. Jean is a typical boy genius character and is infatuated with science. He is a great mechanic and builds contraptions far beyond the capabilities of modern society at that point in history. Although he screws up and even at one time endangered everyone because of it, he doesn't let his shortcomings stop him. He just learns from his mistakes and keeps on tinkering as best as he can while also going through puberty and finding out what love is. Jean is a very nice main lead for the story he's in, and while this archetype of a child prodigy has been done to death in many forms of media, it's refreshing to see somebody who still does act like an immature kid instead of a glasses-pushing know-it-all in other shows. He is tenacious and persevering in his ambition, but does have a bit of an ego that he has to let go of to be able to move further in his growth as a person. The same can be said for his love interest and main heroine, Nadia. You know, the girl on the fucking poster. A mysterious acrobatic whose affinity for life and nature can often put her at odds with everyone around her. She is stubborn and impulsive, which would make her a very annoying character, and granted she can be a bit too irritating to listen to in some episodes, but for her, is just how she is. Being around animals for most of her life had born inside her an unfathomable love for peace and prosperity, but it also means she is slow going and opening up to people. Plus, her relationship with some of the characters allows her to be more than just your standard 90s damsel, although that isn't saying too much since she does get kidnapped several times over the duration of the show. The two as our main heroes presents plenty of dilemma for them to butt heads with the adults in their lives, whether they be friends or enemy. They both are charming and easy to care about, and while Nadia does get the shaft in typical early anime canon, she does have the most development as a character can go. So what about the supporting cast? Well, skipping over Marie and King, who most of the time are just there to fill a quota for the network, the Grambus gang and the crew on the Nautilus outstage the main characters. The Grambus crew, consisting of leader Grandis, Hansen, and Sansen, reminds me a lot of Team Rocket from the Pokemon TV series. They start off as your standard recurring villains, always showing up in every episode to cause trouble for the heroes, but unlike Jesse, James, and Meowth, who mostly stay in their respective roles, the Grambus gang pretty much become friends with their former enemies, making way for a ton of fun dynamic character interactions, like Hansen and John building inventions together, Marie and Sansen's immature nature getting themselves into hijinks, and Grandis being the supportive mother figure to Nadia. On board the Nautilus, Captain Nemo and Miss Electra are pretty well the only two who get the most screen time, and their roles in the story are just as important as Nadia's. Nemo is quiet and reserved, much like the Nemo in the novel. He dislikes imperialism, and his thirst to eradicate the villain organization of Neo Atlantis drives much of the drama of the show. But when Nadia comes aboard, there is a sudden urge by him to start opening up. This causes major whiplash to the structure of the crew, and when his past is revealed, it results in one of the best episodes of the series. Miss Electra, meanwhile, has more of a common motherly sense of hospitality, but as the show goes on, you quickly realize her sudden mood swings and irrational level of thinking hides a troubled past full of betrayal, heartbreak, and even seated jealousy. Now, the last gang of characters to mention are the antagonists, but I won't go too much into them. They're just your stock standard army of evil that you see in a lot of anime shows, kind of like Cobra from G.I. Joe. But they are a legitimate threat to our crew on the Nautilus and are very dastardly in their devotion to global conquest. Also, they look like Klansmen, so of course they're bad. If this took place in modern day, they would definitely be carrying tiki torches. After the characters, the next thing to highlight is the animation, which coming from classic Gainax, looks pretty good for their first TV show. Again, what helms the show was never really the animation, because while it can look great under the right circumstances, at other times it can be very stilted and grainy. It's more the visual direction and shift in patterns that really make this series. I think my favorite shot has to be when Nadia is talking with the crew about the fate of those on board and what needs to be sacrificed in order to stay alive. The whole scene takes our characters and places them in a conversation spaced from real time, echoing their feelings and what events led them to their decision. If it were just characters talking in separate scenes about what transpired previously in, say, an empty but well-lit room, the emotional impact would have been nullified. Anno has impeccable attention to detail for his cast, since they are the ones we as the audience have to follow and learn about. So when a death of a character happens or a discovery occurs that genuinely affects that person, the visuals must tell how they're suffering, and Anno does this very well, almost out of habit. The background art is also well drawn, and when the animation does kick into high gear, it's something that by today's digital breakthroughs can't be recreated. Keep in mind that the technology was pretty old back then, and if not for Anno's direction, this could have easily have been a subpar adventure filled with no impact or urgency. That, along with plenty of religious symbolism, metaphors, and themes that would appear in many more of his work. Kinda like... So you might be thinking, wow, this show must be truly the lost gem of 90s animation. What could have possibly made it to be forgotten about? I think I know what it is. After the conclusion of the best episode of Nadia, episode 22, Hideaki Anno was on stress leave, and only served as chief animator for the last few episodes of the show. While Anno was recuperating from depression caused by the production of the first 22 episodes of Nadia, Shinji Hikuchi, who is best known for his work on Kill la Kill and Dragon Pilot Misane, directed the remainder of the show, and if you watched it, this is where everything went wrong. For one, the animation was downgraded, and the themes of the show resembled something close to an identity crisis. Missing were the harsh tones and fantastic set designs, replaced with bland islands and villages, as well as content better suited for a cartoon for children than for teenagers. The cause of this big oof was mostly due to Cy Young Animation, who are infamous for animating those shitty cartoons based off video game licenses like The Legend of Zelda, Captain N, and the Super Mario Bros. Super Show.
Hey, excuse me, princess.
Jesus Christ almighty. This was most likely a way to save some money, due to the production cost of making 39 episodes instead of just the typical 24 or 25. And because of that, several episodes really do look horrible. Probably the worst one was episode 34, where the animation not only looked terrible, but achieves the marginal sin that any anime should do, be essentially a fucking clip show. Because when I think of epic and engaging narratives, I think of 90s J-pop songs with recap footage. Should have had that in the series finale of Game of Thrones.
Nadia, Nadia, 僕の気持ちを聞いてくれよ.
But animation is just one key problem, because the worst of it has to be the misdirection of the production crew and its dumbing down of essential characterization. Nautilus, Gargoyle, and Neo Atlantis don't even play a big role in these episodes, and only episode 30 and 31 actually contain anything relevant. The rest of the stories are just things you expect from a desert island setup. The island fever, going Tarzan, fishing, finding treasure, just generic shit. And even when they get off the island, they just go to another island and do just about the same pointless garbage, like building robots to prove it's better because this is what audiences wanted? Nothing happens to develop the motivations of our leads, and they act either bored or painfully obnoxious. For example, Nadia had her problems in the beginning and was starting to really grow as a person, becoming less triggered and accepting people's opinions. But in these episodes, she is by far the worst part. Her level of irritation and smugness during this point really got on my nerve, and she just acts plain stupid throughout this 11 episode drought. Like she has a big heartfelt moment with John by the end of episode 31, which quite honestly was starting to get back on track to what I liked most about the show. But then it goes straight back to stupid again when they land in Africa, and she starts to completely fall for another character, totally forgetting everything Jean has done for her in this just Ugh! You can tell that there were major behind the scenes issues, and that decisions to make this as cheap as possible just speaks on levels of incompetence and poor planning. Once the cast does get out of Africa though, things do start to pick up again and it does wrap the show up nicely. But still, the 11 episodes before episode 35 are possibly the worst thing I've ever watched in terms of filler. No joke, I could actually watch the Naruto fillers in one sitting and find more enjoyment out of them than in here. I can at least laugh at those fillers than be fuming out of my ears at the ludicrousy of these episodes. I'm fucking serious, guys. Holy shit. Fuck me gently. That black bar hinders its attraction, because without focus or unique vision spearheading it, the show hit essentially an iceberg in its path, and like that, even by its conclusion, the show just sank. It didn't know what it was trying to say, or convey it in a thought-provoking way, because of the constant reminder that you wasted a lot of time watching dull and pointless story beats. But what it did do is something worth mentioning. I've been holding this off for here, but what Ono did in his depression period directing Nadia was something he mentioned when developing a new series in 1993. During that period of depression in his life, he took the notion of not running away from your problems in a whole new light, and in line with a Cruel Angel thesis, it bloomed into the most iconic anime franchise of all time. Neon Genesis Evangelion is the rebirth of Hideaki Anno's vision for Nadia, a story surrounding teenagers on a peak of adulthood fighting against a threat that can destroy the Earth as well as in themselves. Trading in nautical fiction with mecha action, Evangelion took the themes of Anno's past work and made it flow better with a narrative and characters set in the world's environment. When you look at both shows, it's pretty interesting to see some of the characters from Nadia get reworked and altered into characters of the Evangelion universe. I would even argue that Nadia herself was split to become two of the most well-respected female characters, Rei and Asuka. Rei's cold and apathetic demeanor and Asuka's fiery stubbornness could very well have been molded from the personality that Nadia had. I know you can say I'm grasping at straws and that a lot of these characters could have come from other concepts and failed projects by Anno, but it's also quite noticeable when the iconography of Nadia makes its way into Evangelion's designs for the angels. And while yes, Gainax didn't learn their lesson and went majorly over budget with Evangelion just like they did with Nadia, the money it made compared to their last project was just no contest. Its legacy spawned several movies and side projects that it overshadowed its flaws, and has risen into the upper echelon of anime fandom. And while Evangelion is much better handled and directed, could you imagine what would have happened if Nadia didn't exist? If Evangelion was made without Nadia's involvement, something could have gone wrong. In another timeline, Evangelion could have taken the place of Nadia under the Sea of Obscurity. Neon Genesis could have been just another mecha action show that would have been produced to market toys and action figures instead of touching on mature themes about mental disorders, religion, and the instability that humans can have when the chips are down. Unlike Atlantis the Lost Empire, which was made at a time when Disney just couldn't get its feet on the ground and were left creatively bankrupt for a time, Nadia's core themes and production paved the path for anime to launch into the future, even if it tragically got left behind. It was a transitional anime, where old plot lines and adventure stories were on their way out to make room for grand scale epics. And with Evangelion coming to Netflix this June, let's not forget the sacrifice this show made to give us this iconic series. In the end though, it's not all that depressing. Nadia is still a good show, and I enjoyed at least most of its episodes. I would say to skip the 11 episodes of pure shitty filler, but at the same time, they did still elaborate on some of the characters' ethics and motivations, even if it's super duper dumb. But at least it ended fine, and everything turned out good in the end. So if you want to enjoy a show that really did represent 90s animation in an interesting way, then Nadia's Secret of Blue Water is a good journey to sail on, despite its turbulent tides. You can watch the 39 episodes of Nadia on HIDIVE in both English and subtitles. As for Evangelion, despite being in licensed limbo for so long, it will be making its triumphant rebirth on Netflix starting June 21st of this year. Thanks for watching, and tell me of any really good anime from the 90s to recommend, cause you know, we gotta appreciate the older titles that helped anime reach where it is today. it's your bra man taking flight.